Let's go through the papers in a bit more detail. Noah Khogali, the political commentator with Young Voices UK and Conservative councillor, is here. Noah, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. How are you?
Very well. Very embarrassing headlines for the Home Office this morning. Last week we had the Home Secretary saying that it wasn't fit for purpose, and now we find out just, the degree of the incompetence, which means they are wasting billions of pounds. What did you make of this?
It is an absolutely astronomical amount, isn't it? That original number over the 10-year asylum accommodation estimates were due to be £4.5 billion. That's now £15.3 billion, which is an absolutely huge and extremely embarrassing amount of money. And then that coupled with, almost classic government quagmire and the Home Office having failed to collect £46 million that it was owed by two companies for providing accommodation, just really compounds that this is, a classic government trying to do a big thing and making it extremely expensive and cumbersome failure, as it often does. But it is also, I think, partially that the numbers just of migrants themselves haven't come down in the way that Labour had obviously hoped that they would, and that this year almost 37,000 migrants have crossed the Channel, which is more than the total number that arrived last year in total. It is quite a mess.
Yeah, and it's just some basic things that went wrong. The MP said no penalties were applied for poor performance at migrant hotels. The Home Office missed an opportunity to renegotiate the contracts. It's just sort of basic sort of business structures all fell apart because it was so chaotic. And I think actually because suddenly the demand for the hotels went up so dramatically and so quickly. Talking about how the government spend its money, let's look at this story on the front page of The Guardian, where NHS bosses say, look, we need an extra £3 billion to cover unexpected costs. And if we don't get it, hospitals may have to start rationing care. I mean, it's quite a warning.
It does feel very Groundhog Day, though. I'm sure we've had this warning a number of times, and this time it's because of a triple effect of NHS staff redundancies, strike action by doctors, and higher drug prices. The latter of those is, I think, the most worrying, but it is also just generally quite concerning, given the NHS is already due to receive 196 billion of the 211 billion pound health budget for England this year. Look, we were talking about significant sums of money when it comes to 10 years of migrant accommodation, but those are absolutely mind-blowing quantities of money. And ultimately, we keep having this conversation where the NHS gets 6 months down the line, they get their £3 billion in the end. Wes Streeting says, we're not going to be held to ransom by doctors striking. He is, and then we give them the money, and then in 6 months' time, it just needs more money. Maybe, just maybe, the NHS needs fundamental reform to have another look at how this goes, because we can't just, maintain this doom cycle of needing to massively up its funding every 6 months.
I think the Health Secretary would probably agree with you, but when you suggest reform, Noah, what are you pitching?
A European hybrid-style healthcare system where we maintain free use for the people that need it. And when you go up to a hospital, it is free, but it is funded both by government and by a hybrid insurance model to make sure everybody can still pay, but that it is a better funded system that is, not run in total by an extremely bureaucratic and money wasteful system that is government.
So that would be, it would have a very different National Health Service if that was the case.
Yeah, fundamentally it would, but we need to look to our European neighbours and see what works internationally. The NHS isn't perfect. I think everyone admits that. We need to look at what works worldwide. The US model does not work. We don't want that, but we might just want to look at a European system and see whether that's something that's preferable to what we have now.
Politically, how sort of poisonous do you think it is for the politician that suggests, no longer having the NHS free at the point of need?
No, nobody. It's different to it no longer being free at the point of need. That's the fundamental bit. People, I think, have fallen into a trap where, because the US is the dominant story, it appears to be the only other option. But it can still be, if you walk up to a hospital in Europe, you can still get seen. It can still be free at the point of need. We just have a different way of funding it. It is extremely politically toxic, though, and that's why nobody's suggesting it. Publicly at least, or until they leave politics. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's not the right thing to do. It just might not be the correct way to win an election.
Yeah, I lived in France for a couple of years. You had to pay to see your GP, but you could always see them. So, do we want a system like that? You mentioned the Health Secretary's comments about junior doctors. It's inside the Times today. I mean, this is a real problem. He said the government won't be held to ransom by striking doctors. He says you're putting their jobs at risk. This is sort of a gear change from him. He'd promised to look at sort of the junior doctors' contract and training opportunities for them. And, they're planning to walk out for 5 days in England from the 14th of November. And the Health Secretary is saying sort of those promises I made about what might happen to jobs can be taken away if you pursue this strike action.
Yes, and they're looking for, a 30% pay increase as well, which, again, to the general public probably seems like quite a significant amount. 5 days of action, but on November 14th through to November 19th would be extremely impactful. And again, feels a little bit like Groundhog Day. We have been seeing this more and more. Labour put themselves, I think, into a tricky situation whilst they were in opposition, because they did essentially, on any striking matter, basically just call for the Conservative government at the time to back down. And now they're almost having to reap the challenges from that, which is, I'm sure they're kicking themselves slightly over because they could have been slightly more nuanced. But this is the situation in which they now find themselves.
Yeah. I mean, we've got all these cost pressures that we've talked about, sort of underlying actually every story so far in the papers. We've got a month now, exactly a month, until Rachel Reeves delivers her budget. Libby Purvis has been writing in The Times. She says, it's time to stop the obsession with the B word. I'll give you a moment or two to think about what that B word might be. She says it's been nearly 10 years since the Brexit referendum. Let's stop sulking about the result and create something new. And in part, she's written this, Noah, because the Chancellor, the Health Secretary, the Prime Minister are planning really on saying Brexit is to blame for some of the tax rises we believe might be coming. Is Libby right? We need to move on from Brexit, think about something new?
She is right in that, the genie is out of the bottle. Whether you supported Brexit or opposed it, nobody has a time machine. We have to move on regardless. And I'd hope that would be, engaging with our close neighbours on the continent who have, in essence, something that could be, and I stress on could be, a wonderful free market, but that is massively, dampened by massive overregulation and involvement in, fundamentally the things that should be the purview of national governments. At its best, there is potential for it to be, as it once was, a wonderful, pro-trade agreement. That isn't what it ended up being, and that's what pushed a lot of people towards Brexit. But we need to have a look at engaging, the way we can best engage with potentially the good bits, whilst not engaging with the bad bits. That's very oversimplified. But she is right in that we do need to move on and find another way to work with our physically closest allies.
Well, we've got some lots of ideas being speculated between now and November about what the Chancellor is exactly going to do, who she's going to blame and whose shoulders will bear the brunt. A former governor of the Bank of England was speaking over the weekend, written up in the Times today, and said, look, proposals to impose a mansion tax on high-end properties is an approach that could damage the economy. What's the argument?
Ultimately, that this kind of financially punitive measure doesn't make people want to, number one, stay in the UK or continue to invest in the UK. There is a challenge here, I think, where especially Labour governments have used this term about, the broadest shoulders should carry the most weight, as if they don't actually already do that. And I'm going to butcher the statistics. I've not got it right in front of me, but there is some genuinely insane statistic that it's about, the top 10% of tax earners that provide something like 80% of the income tax revenue. Those broadest shoulders are, by definition, there bearing the most weight. At what point will politicians become tired of saying that and thinking that it's enough?
I mean, I think they are tired of saying that, but the Chancellor is without many options. We'll see what she does in a month's time. Final thing, this is sort of slightly in contrast with the stories we hear about cost of living or what we see ourselves in the supermarket. The new oyster cult, why millennials... I'm a millennial, I'm not sure if you are, Noah. Love a mollusk, apparently. Once thought a luxury dish, says The Times. A new generation has been shucking it up with the best of them. Is oysters something that appeals to you? Would you be going out for them on the weekend? That's what you'd spend your money on?
I mean, not every weekend, but I am
occasionally.
partial to an oyster.
Right.
It does seem odd to me in that it does apparently sound like lots of young people are drawn to them for their health benefits because they're low in calories, loads of protein, which is obviously the obsession, and their sustainability factors. Not going to lie, I had no idea about any of that. They're just quite nice.
Okay. There we go. The best place to have them, I think, is on the seaside in Margate, where I think they're sort of like £1 or £1.50 each. And then you can just have one and just sort of, that's it, the experience over. Noah, thank you. Noah Khogali, the political commentator with Young Voices UK, thank you.